Well, hi, my name is Logan. Welcome to the Premiere Asia DVD release of a modern-day martial arts classic, Ong-Bak. And how often do we get to say that there's a modern-day film, a film being released like today, that is a martial arts masterpiece? All the martial arts masterpieces were made back in the 60s, in the 70s and the 80s. And here we have a movie that was shot just a couple of years back and is already acclaimed worldwide, cult film, and a movie that put Thai action cinema on the map, and a new major martial arts star in the form of Tony Jaa. And I remember very clearly the first time I set eyes on Tony Jaa, I was preparing a movie that was shot in Thailand called The Medallion, and we were on a tape of him demonstrating his martial arts techniques, and I was absolutely stunned and was so delighted when a few years later he finally got to show his stuff in this film. But there was a very early showreel with a lot of the same techniques that we see in this film being circulated, and I was lucky to see it very early in the day, and was not at all surprised when the worldwide audience got to see what he could do, and he became a superstar. Wonderful opening here. People talked initially when the film was released about the slow opening. I feel it's very important because you're introducing not just this new star and this new kind of action cinema, but you're introducing Thailand to a world audience. And you want to show the juxtaposition between this rural environment here of the village of Nong Pradu in northeastern Thailand, and later you have to introduce bustling metropolis of Bangkok, the capital of the country. There's actually no real Nong Pradu, but there is a temple, Wat Pa Pradu, and so the actual name of Nong Pradu was made up for the purposes of the film. Original music score at this point was traditional Thai instruments, and here the film has been rescored under the supervision of my dear friend Brian White at Contender, working with Richard Wells. And I have to say, I think the score that we've done for this film is superior to the original score, certainly as far as the international viewing audience is concerned. There was also another score provided by Luc Besson, the director and producer from France, who rescored the movie with this French techno pop for that market. And even though it might not be to my taste or to the taste of some of the fans, at the same time it worked well for that market, so I guess it's horses for courses. But there's an original Thai soundtrack if you get the Thai version, and there is the soundtrack that you hear here, which is my favorite that I've heard for this film. This sequence here reminds me rather much of the opening of a movie called Dragon Lord, starring Jackie Chan. Actually, it could be the opening or the closing, depending on which print of Dragon Lord you happen to see. But they have a sequence there based on a tradition that takes place on one of the islands off of Hong Kong called Jeongjao, where they have like a bun mountain, which is like a kind of a bamboo construction, and all these young people kind of compete, young men climb up to the top of the mountain to grab a prize. It's like not a real mountain, it's like a wooden mountain, and they fall off. And this is very similar to, not what happens in Jeongjao, but what happens in the Jackie Chan movie Dragon Lord that was inspired by Jeongjao. And as I mentioned before, I mean, I was really fortunate to see, I've been lucky in my career to have actually noticed the new action star rising very early in the day. And it's a great blessing. I mean, I'm really happy about that, because there's a certain special excitement when you look at somebody like a Jean-Claude Van Damme or a Jackie Chan for the first time, and you realize that they're going to have a career to a certain level based on their unique style and their unique physical appearance. And certainly that was the case with Tony Jaa when I first saw him. I said we should put him in The Medallion, and was voted down because he was coming, his management at that time was not the management who would later bring him to stardom. And the gentleman representing him was saying that he'd only do the film if he had the end fight against Jackie, which would have been fine with me, but it really wasn't that kind of film. And so I was actually, during my tenure at Emperor Group, developing a movie for him to do with two other action stars, Fan Siu-wong, who's a Chinese action actor, Brad Allen, who was in Gorgeous, and Tony Jaa, because I didn't anticipate that he would break out in Thailand the way he did. He was actually signed to a major Thai label for quite some time, a company called Grammy, who didn't do anything with him. They really didn't know what to do with him. This is Tony stepping down here, the victor, and they didn't know what to do with him. And it was only later that the director-producer Prachap Pinkel saw this unique charisma of Tony Jaa and the incredible vision of the action director Pana Ritikrai, and they formulated this film between them. And the next thing I knew, suddenly he was the next big thing. Quite right, too. Something that's established very early on in the film, and something very close to my heart, is the way that Thai culture is steeped in Buddhism. Thai tradition is in the Hinayana rather than the Mahayana, which is my own area of study, but it's all basically many paths to one truth. But this is the kind of at the heart of Thai society is Buddhism, and it's established very early on in the piece, and this is going to drive the whole plot of the movie. So here we see Tony Jaa without the kind of the white tree climbing makeup, and I think he's got a fascinating everyman nature to him. He's not a pretty boy. This is one of the reasons that Grammy didn't know what to do with him, because he wasn't a pretty boy actor. He's got an everyman look to him. Here's one of the bad guys, Don, played by Wanakrit Sirioput. And Wanakrit Sirioput, also visible in the Steven Seagal movie Belly of the Beast, which was filmed in Thailand. He plays like a gangster in the nightclub scene, gets beaten up by Seagal. And he's also in the movie Sniper 3, opposite my friend Byron Mann and Tom Berenger, which also shot on location in Thailand. He's a bellboy in that movie. Really good actor, and speaks good English as well, though in this movie, obviously, he's speaking Thai. Interesting Steven Seagal's story. Seagal had a lot of interest in working in Thailand and had seen a very early cut of Ong-Bak, and he wanted to buy the rights for the film, and that deal didn't happen for whatever reason. But one of the things he was thinking of doing was reshooting the opening and closing segments, in which we don't see the monk who's we see in a moment a monk who's the actual instructor of Tony Jaa. It was maybe Steven Seagal was going to play that monk, because Seagal himself is a member of a Buddhist group, and has been announced as a reincarnate lama. So he was going to come and play that particular role if he could have got the rights. And he also wanted to use Tony Jaa in Belly of the Beast, and in every case didn't happen. But again, has to be said for Steven, he was ahead of the curve in that he saw this real talent and wanted to make use of him in his own films. The classic, the origin story, if you can call it, it's almost having a superhero having an origin story. The idea that Tony Jaa, as the character played by Tony Jaa Ting, as a baby, was found abandoned under Ong-Bak. Ong-Bak is the name of the Buddha statue that we just saw. So the whole movie is kind of driven by the quest for the head, what's going to be the missing head of Ong-Bak. But Ong-Bak is the Buddha statue from which this village gets its blessing and its good fortune. Here's a first chance to see Tony really in martial arts action. But the idea is that he, as a baby, was left underneath the statue. So it's like this orphan child who comes into this community and becomes its hero and is sent out to prove himself when the head of Ong-Bak is stolen. And I think it's very much in the tradition of like the Joseph Campbell power of myth about the Pracha Pinkyo as a very intelligent filmmaker decided this would be the wonderful way to introduce Tony Jaa, not as some kind of city slicker, but as a country boy, which he kind of is in real life. Very sweet, naive, amiable man in real life. And the gentleman in the background, Uncle Mao, is played by Kamporn Tepita, who's another veteran actor in Hong Kong, in Thai movies, as a character player. And you get like a lot of actors who, once you watch Thai films, really have come back in a big way now, and you get to see a lot of the same actors working repeatedly in the industry. And it's a very strong industry now, particularly with this particular group of filmmakers at Baramu, Pracha Pinkyo's company. Here's Waranad Tanti Pidok Prakru, who's the teacher, the monk, who's teaching martial arts to Tony Jaa. And you get, again, this kind of interesting dilemma here. You're teaching somebody a fighting art, but because you're Buddhist, you can't actually use it. And I would say it's interesting. It's kind of like a plot point in the Bruce Lee movie, Big Boss, which was also shot in Thailand, where Bruce Lee's character turns up and he's a martial arts master, but he's promised his mother he's never going to fight. And it's the same thing here. He's getting, the backstory is that his one of the great masters has killed an opponent, and therefore this is against classical Buddhist teaching. So you're learning these arts, but to what end? For health, to climb trees and win the pennant. And in the end, of course, we find out why his destiny is to save the village and to go to retrieve the head of Ong-Bak. So that's why he's being trained in this particular method. Tony Jaa, his real name was Panom Yirum, born on February 5th, 1976, in the northeastern province of Surin in Thailand. And his parents were elephant herders, which is really interesting because his latest film, Tom Yum Gung, he actually plays a young man who raises elephants in that film. So his parents were actually elephant herders, and he was a huge fan of martial art movies in his youth and loved the films of Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan and Jet Li, and he would just go out into the yard and copy their movements for hours and hours. And then it was only after he saw a Thai action film called Born to Fight, which was made in 1986, that he met the man who would become his master, his guru, Panaritikrai, who was like the Bruce Lee of Thailand in a way. And Panam Yuram, Tony Jaa as he was then known, went to university, studied various martial arts, taekwondo, judo, aikido, anything he could study, and then subsequently became apprenticed to Panaritikrai, and he got his first major job on a movie working as the stunt double for Robin Shou on the film Mortal Kombat Annihilation, which was shot in 1997 and shot partly on location in Thailand. And later, having tried unsuccessfully to break into the industry in Thailand, which at the time really wasn't geared to doing martial arts action films, he and his partners shot this action reel, which got circulated, which is the one that I saw, and eventually he got to make Ong-Bak, and action cinema history was made. So we are at the village. The village has been robbed, and a hero must rise. And it's kind of like the Seven Samurai, but in this instance, we only have one samurai who is going to go out and save the day, save the village. Not just save the head of Ong-Bak, but also save the village, because it's like, as the head is lost, it's like, you know, the king in Excalibur, you and the land are one, and as you die, the land dies with you. It's like the Ong-Bak is the spirit of the land, and as it goes, so does the blessing of the land. So you have the famine, you're going to have a drought, and you're going to have people becoming sick. So this is why Ong-Bak is so important. It's not just a physical treasure held by the village. Always in these films, you have the village leader is the Buddhist monk. I mean, it's not just somebody administering spiritual teachings, but also somebody who's a political leader. So you have him, obviously, everybody giving him great respect. And it's always, in these films, if you look at Bang Rajan, it's the same. Whenever the monk speaks, everybody stops to listen. There's huge respect for the clergy. This is something that was cut from the Luc Besson version of the film. Luc Besson was another early advocate of this movie and recut the film for the French market. And this medicine is meant to relieve pain and give strength to whoever uses it. It's passed down from one of the earlier teachers of this particular ancient Muay Thai that Ting has been taught. So that's all cut. So later in the film, when we see him actually applying that herb to his arms to make himself stronger and make him not feel pain, it doesn't really make sense. But this was, I think, maybe Luc Besson's people felt this was too Thai, it was too regional, that it wouldn't work for the French market. But we've obviously got that back in and subtitled correctly in this version, so that we see that this is actually part of the tradition, the ancient traditions of Muay Thai. And I think it's wonderful to see action cinema used in this way, not just to tell a really powerful and moving story, but also to convey elements of a culture. This girl here, Porn Pimol Chuk Kanthong, as Mai Wan, who gives him the ring. And also there's this really kind of like a very gentle romantic sense. There's obviously, from the beginning when he was doing his tree climbing, she was watching him and she's enjoying his success. And there's like a really understated romance. She's kind of the girl back home waiting for him in the village when he heads out. So there's that kind of little bit of a subplot happening there, which is never really developed, but it gives, I guess, an extra emotional impetus to the fact that he's traveling from this gentle home where he's been brought up into this really unfamiliar terrain. And there's a great jump cut here. We're almost in Rumble in the Bronx territory as we have these illegal bike races on the streets of Bangkok. And I really think it was like great the way they juxtaposed the serenity of Nong Pradu with like the wildness of these backstreet chases. And introduced these two wonderfully colourful characters. And really, I mean, what amazed me when I saw the film was not just the extraordinary martial arts ability of Tony Jaa, which I was already aware of, but the sophistication of the filmmaking in general and the film storytelling. Look at the Al Pacino T-shirt there. There's a few knowing nods to Western cinema, and that's one of them. And now we introduce this guy on the left with the short dyed blonde hair is Petchai Wongkam Lao, and this is the girl on the right, Pumwari Yodkamal, who's Moylek. And so these are these two con merchants, wonderful broad characters. The guy on the left, a.k.a. George, a.k.a. Hum Lai, which is his Thai village name, Pechai Wongkam Lao, is better known as Mum Jok Mok. And he is a very popular TV host as well in Thailand, and had done a few film roles in kind of really lower budget movies. And this film really brought him into major stardom. And later, he would trade off that to direct and star in a movie called The Bodyguard, which is like a comedy with a little bit of action. And I would say, if Ong-Bak is like a Jackie Chan film, The Bodyguard is a Wong Jing movie, and not a particularly good Wong Jing movie at that. Wong Jing being is the Roger Corman of Hong Kong, like a prolific Hong Kong actor, director, producer. Tony Jaa has a small cameo in the movie The Bodyguard. But of course, the poster campaign and the DVD sleeve in Thailand has both of them like side by side. So it's kind of playing off the success of Ong-Bak. And they're teamed up again in Tom Yam Goong, which I haven't seen the whole film, but I've seen quite a bit of footage. It looks fantastic, and I think will again further establish the international reputation of the filmmaking team behind Ong-Bak, and also this wonderful double act between Tony Jaa and Mum Jok Mok, this gentleman here. Very funny actor, and I just feel here he's used really to good effect, because he's kind of really up against serious bad guys and a serious hero. When you see him in The Bodyguard, he's kind of taking center stage, and probably for Western audiences, it's a bit too much of a good thing. Anyway, this is like kind of a little indicating here that we have all these drugs for sale on the street. This gang leader is Peng, and the actor's called Chatawut Wat Charakun. Chatawat Wat Charakun. Here's Tony Jaa, and this actually there's a deleted scene that would run just before this, is when Ting is looking for George, who's his fellow village member, and he prays at a backstreet shrine, and Muay Lek, the girl, almost runs him down on her motorbike, and she kind of looks down at him as like a country bumpkin, kind of a bit like Way of the Dragon with Bruce Lee, when the relatives don't really know, who this guy is. She doesn't know who he is, and then later she gets a call from George telling her to meet him, which is the meeting that we're seeing here, and Ting sees George. Somehow he sees George sitting on the motorbike talking on the phone, and he chases after him, and now they have the meeting where she sees that he's been beaten up by the other gangsters, and then we have the arrival of Ting. And in the background of the shot, you can actually see the same shrine that he was praying at earlier. But that's actually, I believe, all the deleted scenes will be elsewhere on this disc. But at least there's the shrine. At least I can point out to you now where they actually take place in the film itself. So that was like a brief deleted scene, and it kind of establishes how he knows where they are. So here's where he turns up, and we really see him. Muay Lek has already seen him once, but this is when George is seeing him for the first time in a long time. And George, a.k.a. Hum Lai, is actually denying the fact that he was ever a village boy. He's kind of into being the city slicker. He doesn't want to admit that he grew up in this backwoods town of Nong Pradu. So in this first scene between these three main characters, we see like the great dynamic between Tony Jaa as the naive country boy hero, and George, who's this kind of really kind of abrasive con man, and this charming girl. Now the interesting thing about Pamori Yodkamal, this actress, I met her in Busan Film Festival, and was expecting her to be kind of quiet and shy, because she's very, in person, very slender and small. And we were doing an interview with her, and I tell you, when you roll the camera, you can totally see why they cast her in this role, because in person, she just turns on and is so talkative and bright and bubbly and energetic and just so much fun. But when I first met her, she was very quiet and, low-key, and I thought, oh, she's going to be a tough interview. But actually, the people we spoke to that day, she was absolutely the best, and she was just, you turn the camera on and she's off and running. Which is great, and she's great in this movie. She also appears opposite a mum in the movie The Bodyguard in a smaller and less impressive role than she has here. And this kind of moment when you realise that the one thing George cares about. Some prints of the movie, George, as well as being known as Hum Lai, is also subtitled as Dirty Balls, but we don't get that in this particular copy of the film. As I mentioned before, this is an extraordinarily accomplished film from Pracha Pinkyo, and I think most people had never heard of this director prior to Ong-Bak, and he really just came. He actually had quite a lengthy career in Thai cinema, but Thai cinema really hadn't come into the forefront of world cinema at that time. And he really, in the last few years have had the rise of two other Asian giants in terms of filmmaking. One is Korea and the other is Thailand. But in both cases, I mean, there was a period prior to that when the best known films to come out of Thailand or Korea were actually Hong Kong movies or American movies shot on location in those countries, or else or the Philippines was the other great location people would go to. But Hong Kong movies used to be shot on location in Thailand, and now they're kind of beating us at our own game, and Ong-Bak's like a prime example of that. But Pracha Pinkyo, his company, he's director and producer, and his company is called Baram U, which is, I think, a wonderful name for a film. And name for a company, for a film company, Baram U. And it's like he's been a prolific producer and relatively, in terms of directing, has just directed a couple of pictures prior to this, directed this movie, and then did Tom Yum Goong, which is the next major Tony Jaa movie. Here we are in the Bangkok version of Fight Club, and it's like establishing these illegal matches are happening. Now, the white guy in the fight here is Eric Marcus Schutz, who's a real bruiser. You look at him and think, wow, this guy's a real bruiser. A more charming and soft-spoken and nice man you can never meet. I had the pleasure of working with him on the movie The Medallion, and he had like a supporting role in there as one of the heavies. But you can also see him as a security guard in Belly of the Beast. You can see him in the movie Beautiful Boxer, and you can see him in another movie called Province 77. And the guy he's fighting is Ali, who's played by Paul Gaius. And the bad guy we see there with the throat device is Suchao Pongwalai as Komtuan, who's obviously had some form of cancer and his voice box had been removed, so he's talking through this electronic speaking device. He's a veteran actor, very good actor in Thai cinema. You can see him in Suryathai, which was a Greek period epic that was picked up for distribution in America by Francis Ford Coppola. It was released as The Legend of Suryathai. And he's also in an international film shot in Thailand called Angkor, The Cambodia Express, which was shot in 1982, and really a fine character player. And you kind of, with these movies, you need a bad guy, and I think it's a wonderful twist having a guy who, has got an attribute that might be quite sympathetic, that he's had this illness and he can only speak through this speaking device. But it adds to his menace, perhaps, that he's got this kind of robotic Dalek speaking voice. So this subplot of the sister of Muay Thai is actually cut from from the Luc Besson print of the film, so we don't really see her plying her trade as a hooker and as a drug dealer. And so there's some scenes later in the movie that are in the Luc Besson print that perhaps don't have the same resonance, because we actually don't get to see the arc of the relationship between these two sisters, both of them surviving in the big city but using very different means. And so it's this actress is Rung Grawi Baranjdakul as Ngak. And we see that she's living her life basically off of a boyfriend's giving her drugs to deal, and she's a hooker. And Moilek is using her street smarts to get ahead. As I mentioned before, bad guy, not the bad guy, but like the white fighter there, Pearl Harbor, Eric Marcus Schutz, and he's actually from Europe. He's actually from Germany, and very imposing physically, but a very charming and nice guy. I remember shooting The Medallion. He had the job of taking Lee Evans, his manager, out on the town, and that was quite a job, quite a mission. He was also one of the action directors on this movie called Final Combat, which starred a guy called Tony White, who was trying to be the new Jean-Claude Van Damme. And the film hasn't been released anywhere, but he worked on that. That was shot in Thailand. So here, I mean, one of the things that's a kind of a little bit of a stretch is the fact that Ting, who has no real knowledge of Bangkok geography, always manages to find the motorbike of George. But, maybe there's a sense that he's guided by Ong-Bak, that he's guided by the Buddha, by the spirit of the Buddha. So a brutal match here between these two guys. And now, it used to be in the 80s, you had like a kind of revolving cast of colourful Westerners living in Hong Kong, being in Hong Kong martial arts movies. Now they've all moved to Thailand. And you've got all these wonderful characters living and working in Thai cinema, because there's more action films, either local Thai movies being shot with action or American movies being shot on location in Thailand and using a lot of Western players. So we established the sheer power of Pearl Harbor. And I remember when Steve Rivers, who at the time was one of the owners of Hong Kong Legends, was telling me about his first viewing of the film, and he described this scene. And I was like, well, it's a bit anticlimactic. This guy's going to come out and drop a bigger opponent with just one kick. But now I see it. It really works very well indeed. And This guy's great, the MC. I mean, you need a guy he really is a full bore character player. I mean, he's kind of one of those roles that you really have to attack with 110% energy, and he does that throughout. So the first, we've already had a hint that Tony Jaa, there's more to him than meets the eye, because we've seen him at the opening physical exhibition on the tree and training. Now we get to see him really go to town. Look here, there's actually a continuity error in his very first technique. We look at him, he's in a left-handed stance. Very evidently, the camera moves in when he's doing a left-handed stance, and then when there's a very abrupt cut, without changing stance, he kicks from a right fighting stance. So I guess in terms of filmmaking, maybe they were still finding their way at the point that this was shot. But it's kind of very evident mistake just coming up when the first stunning knee is executed. So watch for it, because it was something that was picked up by. I think you probably have to be a geek and watch the film a bunch of times to pick up on that kind of stuff. But he's in the warm up to actually attacking his attack on Pearl Harbor. We see him in his left stance. There's the left stance. Boom! Suddenly he's changed stance between shots, and maybe there was a missing shot between there. Bang! And Eric is down for the count and out of the movie. But great guy. Hope he gets some more work there. And there's our bad guy, one of the main fighting bad guy of the film, getting an introductory shot there, which is always great when they do foreshadowing in films. I mean, I think one of the worst things in action films is when you bring people in out of left field who've never been established in the movie, and here's so and so. And I think it's great. It's kind of respecting a certain degree of intelligence on the part of the audience, that you actually establish somebody early on, like we saw with the bad guy Surin just then, and later he's going to be a main physical antagonist for Ping and the rest for Tony Jaa's character for Ting and the rest of the movie. So that really kind of paves the way for what is to come. And there's great reaction shots. There's constant echo between Tony Jaa, who's this very quiet, unassuming, and guy with just this energy towards doing good work, to basically accomplishing his mission, and George, who's really just out for number one, and that's kind of a fun thing to see constantly juxtaposed. I think if you just had Tony Jaa on a mission of revenge and recapture, then it would probably be a really one-note film of him kind of storming along and beating up everybody in his wake. But by setting up this kind of odd family structure of these three, it gives the film a depth and kind of character. There's this address of Don. We see it in this scene, and actually there's a number of deleted scenes. I'll point them out when they would have come into the film. When we see the quest for Don, and the fact that actually Tony Jaa doesn't have that much luck always with Bangkok geography, and he's trying in vain to find Don's place. So there's Mum Jat Mok getting to really go for it there with Thai language itself lends itself, I think, to these kind of like curses and very expressive use of language, and it's I think probably to Western ears quite an unusual sound to it, the language, but it's kind of quite entertaining, quite amusing, and very different in texture to Korean language or Chinese language, but very expressive, and they're very, very sing-song. So I think that sometimes especially with the comedic characters, the performance actually comes across very well on the subtitle version, because you get to hear these voices which are really so expressive in their native tongue. And again, different aspects of Thai culture being communicated by this movie. This odd relationship between these two. What are they? Is there any romantic interest between them? Is it brother and sister? Is it like father and daughter? But the two of them surviving on the streets of Bangkok together, just using their wits. And this is a wonderful temple. This is the Wat Sun Temple, which is on Suksawat Road in the Rat Barana district of Bangkok. In the background, you see this bank, the big building, the triangular-shaped building that you see in the background there is the Kasikorn Bank Thai, the Thai Farmer Bank, which is next to the great Chao Phraya River, which runs through Bangkok. And again, constantly this spirit of Buddhism throughout this movie, and the idea of Thailand as a place where people are motivated by their belief in Buddha and the teachings of Buddha. So whenever he's at a loss, there was a deleted scene where he goes to a roadside shrine, but whenever he's at a loss, we see Ting going to a temple and asking for guidance from Buddha. And I think it's like, again, adds texture to his character and separates him really from many of the characters of martial arts action cinema. Doesn't stop him from being one of the most brutal on-screen fighters in the history of the genre, but still it's like it's another aspect of the character that is quite touching. And here we see gorgeous sepia images the devastation of the village, that the drought has come, that the head of Ong-Bak is gone, that the good fortune of the village is gone, and then you get this scenes of drought. And it's kind of adding to the pressure that Tony Jaa's character must find Ong-Bak and bring it back for his home to be safe. So you have to kind of accept, I suppose, a certain supernatural power on the part of the statue, that as it has gone, as the head has gone, there's actual tragedy has befallen, and so there is indeed some magic power. This shot here is part of a longer sequence when you see him walking through the streets, and Moylek, the girl, comes by on her moped. He shows her Ton's address. She takes him on the back of the moped, and she's an old woman, and asks her, and Ting asks the old woman to help him find Don, but she can't really help him. And that was a longer sequence. And again, it was kind of a bit of a reach. It was like he happened to be walking in the street at that point, and then Alec comes by and gives him a ride on a moped. But it kind of showed further the relationship between the two of them, and the fact that she thinks he's kind of cool, more so than George does. This is really reflective of Thai people, Thai culture. Thai people, I mean, like many Asians, they love to gamble. My brother was married to a Thai woman. I remember they were running a Thai pub in England, and every Sunday all her friends would turn up and sit there. They'd unfold a sheet on the floor. They closed the pub, and they would be gambling, and they didn't want to talk, they didn't want to eat, they wanted to gamble. So it is these are obviously like a little illegal Bangkok gambling den, and these two con artists pulling off or attempting to pull off a scam on their fellow gamblers. So I mentioned before the background of Pracha Pinkyo, who's like the creative force behind Baramu. He was a producer of a horror movie called 999. It's like 4 or 5, 7 nines in a row. And also the period comedy actioner Heaven 7. And Ong-Bak, of course, is producer and director. Then later Seiyu, Fake, Pisage, and probably the first real follow-up action film to Ong-Bak, which was Born to Fight. I mean, The Bodyguard is much more of a comedy with action than an action movie, but Born to Fight is a slam-bang actioner, and it just finished Tom Yam Goong, which was shot not only in Thailand, but also on location in Australia, my other home country of Australia. So it really established himself as a prime force in Asian filmmaking, and I think where people were copying American or Hong Kong filmmakers for the last 20 years, for the next 10 years at least, we're going to see a lot of these similar kind of shots, similar kind of style of action from Ong-Bak and Tom Yam Goong being copied by other filmmakers worldwide. In fact, even today, I see a lot of very gifted gymnasts and martial arts guys kind of shooting their own films on DV and shooting their own show reels with a lot of this style of action. What I think you really have to give credit to Pracha for is the fact that he not only gives you that physicality, but he also brings a lot of heart and soul to it as well. That's the first thing that you can lose, and the most important thing. Once you've lost it, you've lost all audience participation, is if you just say, okay, I'm going to show you a physical expression of somebody kicking and punching and flipping. You can do that, I won't say easily, but you can put on a physical show in a very straightforward way, but you've got to have heart and soul and characters you care about. And I think the great thing about this particular team is you have Pracha, who's like a wonderful filmmaker and a storyteller, and you've got Pana Ritikrai, who's like this master stunt coordinator and martial arts choreographer. And you also have in Tony Jaa, a bona fide martial arts hero. And then when the film was released in America, even those reviews that didn't like the film as a whole all singled out Tony Jaa for praise and said, this guy is just amazing and is going to have a sensational career. The look of the film throughout, I think, is wonderful. The DP, Natawut Kittikun, had also been the DP on many of the films that really established Thai cinema in the modern era. Films like Nang Nak, Tears of the Black Tiger, Jandara, Heaven 7. He did the Thai segment of 3, which was a kind of a portmanteau horror movie, The Wheel. He was the DP on that. Also was on Ong-Bak, The Bodyguard, a movie called The Overture. Actually, the Overture's music is very similar to the music in the original score of Ong-Bak, and also did Born to Fight. So that was Natawut Kittikun, and a great job as DP. Sequence you're seeing here, we see now going out into the street. It's interesting looking. You always get this when you're shooting movies on location. Kind of disjointed shots of. Sometimes you see rain, not disjointed shots, but like sometimes there's rain on the ground in the background, and sometimes there's not, because obviously when you're shooting on different days, different times, you have different weather to contend with, and they had obviously some rainy days prior to this, so you have some like rain in the background, and then these guys busted. Again, it seems Bangkok comes across as being about the size of a small village, because everybody runs into who they need to see, and everybody runs into who they don't want to see. So you get that kind of get that going on throughout the movie, and I guess the pace of the film is such that you get into it. For example, here, Ting shows up at exactly the right moment in this big city to see these guys getting hammered, and so he can come to their rescue. First chance now to see the amazing street style of Tony Jaa, and all these guys are his hand-picked stunt team, and they've been working for years prior to doing the movie, so they knew each other's timing wonderfully. And so all throughout the film, whenever he's fighting these guys, you can see that not only is he at the top of his game, but these guys are really good. And there was actually a stuntman there for that guy being thrust back into the metal canisters. Tony Jaa himself, as far as I can ascertain, never uses a stunt guy in the whole of the film, which is something really extraordinary. You see water in the background there, and some of the shots you've got water and some you haven't, indicating different shots being shot on different days. Now, this sequence coming up, I mean, I think hands down the greatest action sequence of its year in terms of action, of martial arts action films, and sad to say, far outstripped anything that we saw in Hong Kong. This movie, when it was released in Hong Kong, was the biggest hit of a Thai movie ever in Hong Kong, and it came out and was number one at the Hong Kong box office, which is kind of unusual because it's like coals to Newcastle. We've seen a lot of martial arts movies in Hong Kong, but this was so special and so different. It still found a big audience here and elsewhere in Asia as well. So here we see the normally placid Ting roused to anger by the cold-blooded nature of his former Hum Lai, his former countryman. This is a lot of fun. I mean, just the way they set this up with this guy and bringing in the bad guys. Originally, when they were setting this up, there's actually a lot of footage of the practices and rehearsals. The idea was it was just Ting alone who would be running, with the other two would get away, and then you just see Ting alone running down the street pursued by the henchmen. But now it's kind of you've got George who's kind of following him, and it's becoming like a comedic echo to the movements that Ting is doing, and I think it works really well. And that was something that the director mentioned in interviews, that it was something they came up with relatively late in the day, the idea that you'd have the two of them kind of playing off each other through this sequence. And this is like really... this is the moment, I think, if you're watching the film, people mentioned before, there have been complaints about the fact that the beginning of the film is kind of slow. It's at this point that it really gains momentum, both in terms of the sheer physicality of Tony Jaa and also the comedic touches that you see using the other characters. And I tell you what, in the history of action cinema, I don't know there's been anybody who jumps quite like this guy can jump, without the aid of a wire, without the aid of CG effects. You know, that's their big routine, and the timing of that, I mean, it's just like, really is a Jackie Chan plus. It's like the old silent comedians. And you see, here's great, because you can actually see Ting doing his thing with his extraordinary grace, and then George obviously stumbling along behind him. Bam! Over he goes. Just amazing. It's like watching a guy who's combination Olympic gymnast, kung fu champion, kickboxing champion. And great, this is kind of the broad comedy that always works for Asian audiences. But I found it funny when I watched it as well. Maybe this is something about my lack of sophistication, but I thought it was funny as well. This is kind of fun. I remember there was, I think it was Wayne's World, they had a whole thing about, setting up the fact that all this stuff was going to be in the street at exactly the right time for it to get smashed or jumped through. And this is exactly what you see here, but hey, who cares? It's absolutely fantastic sequence. And, as soon as you see this, you realize there's a new sheriff in town, and his name is Tony Jaa. This is great. Look at that, going over these kind of the roadside stalls. And again, here's George, and it's like a wonderful juxtaposition of the two. And the fact that it's a running fight, I mean, this lends itself to comparisons of Jackie Chan and Tony Jaa himself. Is very quick to cite Jackie as his inspiration and somebody he'd watched in a lot of films and taken a lot of his screen persona from. This is great. This is also one of the great sight gags of the year. I remember thinking this was just so funny that he managed to fend them off with this huge blade, and then the old lady's coming out. You hear the voice. It's just so funny. And it's really international humor. I mean, everybody I've watched this film with in whatever language, even when I didn't have a subtitled version, they laughed at that. It's really great international humor. And really accomplished filmmaking by Pracha, because he's using slow motion, all these different techniques. This is a fantastic sequence here. You know, seeing this kind of the combination of gymnastics, breakdance moves from Tony Jaa, and he's just like. And not only can he move, but my God, they just so know how to shoot it and to really accentuate every movement. Look at the on the wall behind. There's that graffiti which reads "Hi Spielberg, let's do it together." Spielberg misspelled. And apparently, on the this was actually added into the Asian DVD edition and the copy shown at Cannes, but it was not on the original cut or the Thai VCD. Now, I haven't seen the Thai VCD, but apparently that's the case. This curry powder is a weapon. You see that in Project A Part 2 and Accidental Spy. So another nod to the influence of Jackie Chan. But there's actually a couple. I'll mention later, there's another graffiti incident referencing Luc Besson, but this was like Spielberg, who has yet to work with... who has yet to work with Tony Jaa, but probably made a mental note after he saw the film, which I'm sure he did. Look at that. It's just extraordinary. I mean, this is one of the things about the movie that probably works better on DVD, that you can rewind that amazing stuff again and again. Now, I actually haven't seen the new Batman movie, but I understood they actually shot a sequence, I don't know if it made it into the finished film or not, in which I'm presuming it's Bruce Wayne did this running jump over the heads of these guys. And I heard that the same Thai stunt team that worked with Tony Jaa actually came in to set it up. But I can't see them in the credits of the Batman movie. So maybe they did, maybe they didn't. If they didn't, I was misinformed. This is fantastic. And the big monster truck that comes in is actually driven by Panna Rittikrai, who's the action... This guy driving the truck here is Panna Rittikrai, who's actually the action director of the film. Look at that slide. Wow, just amazing. And they just keep topping themselves. I mean, I just think the inventiveness of this sequence is just stunning. And what I think is different about Tony's style is that in between these incredible virtuoso bouts of gymnastic ability, when he fights, there's kind of almost a stillness, like a stability. He kicks, and then he's totally stable in a relatively straightforward stance. And this is very interesting. If you look at this sequence, if you compare the scoring of the Thai version and this current version that we have now, it's so different. I mean, here we have this driving score to add to the danger that George is in. And if you look at the Thai version, the music really doesn't give you the same kind of oomph to the sequence. So this is probably a good... If somebody asked me to indicate why I felt this score was superior, this would actually be a scene that I would cite and compare with the Thai original. Here we are back in the Fight Club, and this guy, Big Bear, played by Nick Cara, who's actually an Australian, based out of Pattaya, where I used to lived for a while in the 80s and was training at a Thai boxing camp, and we'll talk a bit about that in a while later, because there's another character coming up who was around at the same time that I was living in Pattaya, or visiting Pattaya for periods of time. And Nick's actually a bona fide kickboxing champion. He also shot scenes for a movie I was a producer on called The Twins Effect. We shot the opening sequence for that. The railway station was actually shot at a railway station in Bangkok. And he was in that, but he actually wasn't used. He shot sequences, but we actually never used him on camera. No real reason for that. Saming there in the background, played by Chatapong Panatan Aonkul, who's going to be the main fighting bad guy of the movie. Saming Chatapong Pantan Aonkul. And setting up these two guys and almost exactly... See, the club doesn't seem to change, and no one changes their outfits from day to day. It must be a pretty smelly club. So you always see this... you always see the same guys doing pretty much the same things. The waitress who gets harassed here is played by Sukanya Kongkawong, and she gets a specific credit as the waitress in the credits for the movie. It's kind of a thankless role. She gets harassed, and she gets harassed later more viciously in this particular sequence, but Sukanya Kongkawong is the name of the actress. So again, this really a staple of this genre is the fact that the hero is initially reluctant to fight because he's on a specific mission, and unless something is really relevant to his mission, which is getting back the head of the statue, is getting back Ong-Bak, then he's not interested in fighting for the sake of showing off his prowess. So he really has to be pushed into fighting. And the first time he was just trying to get across the fighting square to get his money back. And in this sequence, he's the honor of the Thai people is being offended, and therefore he is forced to take action. Even now, you see he's really reticent to get involved in this kind of underworld activity. He just wants to find Don and use that to help him find Ong-Bak. That's all he wants to do. So now we get to see a taste of Nick Cara's power as this poor guy comes out to take a hammering. And Nick, really a big, solid guy, and really all the bad guys, all the guys that Tony Jaa gets to fight, they look great. As I say, we've got all these amazing characters living in Thailand now, and if you want to find Western martial artists to be bad guys in films, it's quite easy to find them. And not just are they good at martial arts, but they've got real charisma. I mean, they're not professional actors as such, but like Nick has here, they have this certain screen presence and energy that makes them work in these particular roles. In the 80s, you had that in Hong Kong, a whole bunch of guys doing movies here, and probably reached its apotheosis with the Jackie Chan film Operation Condor, which used, or Outlaw Brothers by Frankie Chan, which used almost every Westerner, every martial arts fighting Westerner living in Hong Kong got to be in those films, and that trend kind of passed. And so the guys that had been living here all left town, with a couple of exceptions. And now Thailand is the place to go. If you're a young martial arts enthusiast out there who fancies a shot at being in movies, Thailand's now, I think, a better bet than Hong Kong in terms of a place that you might want to go to get experience and get fights that you can put on your show reel, like actual movie experience. And that's what happened to these guys here. So again, really pushed beyond endurance. You really have to push Tony Jaa beyond endurance. And there's great slow-mo as he steps out. Beautiful flute there. It's Tony Hannigan, who was first flute on The Mission and Titanic, was the flautist that you're hearing here. It's wonderfully evocative, the flute. He actually has 200 handmade flutes in his home. And Tony Hannigan, I mean, it's great to have somebody that caliber working on this particular film, because the film warrants it, and The Mission and Titanic both had fantastic scores, and now this film does as well. So here's kind of like the Thai people have been offended, and the move that we're going to see, the initial move we're going to see from Tony Jaa is called Batalukpak, which means foot touches face. That's a great insult in Thai culture, to use your foot to indicate something or to touch somebody with your foot. So it's like a perfect way to deal with this really rude person. There's great stylized movements there. And this man selling cigarettes is Master Yod Tong, who was actually master of the camp that I trained at in Pattaya, which is called Sijatong in his honor. It was in Banglamung near Pattaya, and I trained there back in the 80s. And he had many famous students, including Samat Payakarun, who turns up in The Bodyguard, the comedy movie that followed this one, and also Kaosai Galaxy. And you can actually see Master Yod Tong as an actor, and he gets some action to do in the movie Born to Fight. His real name is Yod Tong Senanan, and he's like one of the great masters of Muay Thai. So he gets his little moment there. Looks a bit like, if you go back and freeze frame, looks a bit like Takeshi Kitano. And this is like kind of showing the chaos of this environment with people who should not have anything to do with the fights, kind of getting somehow involved with it. Now you look at these moves, kids, don't try this at home. Do not go to the schoolyard and practice this technique, because you will kill somebody. And that was one of the things, I mean, Jackie Chan commented on this movie. He said he really appreciated the physicality of Tony Jaa, but he felt that the film was too violent, that some of the moves were too lethal, and that they would give a bad example to kids watching the films. I actually had the honor. I think I introduced Tony to Jackie. I mean, I introduced him to Tony. Definitely, I introduced Tony to Jackie on the set of New Police Story, and I'm pretty sure that was the first time they'd met. The guy with the bandana on, David Ismalone, playing Mad Dog. And we see him again a bit later. Again, it's great, setting up a forthcoming fight. You see the guy before he actually comes out to fight, which I think is really cool. And here's Yoshiro, supposedly a Japanese, but played in the movie by Nutapol Asavabhakin. And he's like Yoshiro, and obviously a Thai-based guy wearing this kind of funky wig, and he's coming across as a Bruce Lee. He's going to use a kind of a Bruce Lee kind of fighting style up against Tony Jaa's Muay Thai. I think if there's ever a job going at the WWF, this guy's in. He's a great MC. And it's wonderful seeing the two very contrary styles. There's a very light kind of fast on the feet footwork of Yoshiro's character, and then what you're seeing from Tony Jaa, the way he's kind of reading his opponent. And he's actually, a couple of times you see him actually moving to do intercepts before the other guy can actually do a kick. And a lot of times you see things, Tony Jaa coming out of frame, into frame to deliver a knee technique, which is not something you've seen a lot in prior martial arts cinema. So obviously they've both analysed the team, they actually analysed the films of Jackie and Jet Li, and also tried very hard to come up with something new. And I think what's really special also is the way he always comes back to this very rock-solid stance, having performed these amazing high kicks and other athletic movements. That's what makes him different from some of the other guys doing action. And just these really light, tricky movements, but he always comes back to this kind of centralized fighting position, ready position, and this kind of like reading his opponent. Bam! Again, kids, don't do that at home. There was actually for the performer under the wig, he's got like a steel skull cap, which allows for Tony Jaa to actually lay down some kind of impact on the skull area without causing any serious damage. But they really, by the end of this movie, you're kind of thinking that every particular technique known to Muay Thai has actually been applied. But having seen some of the footage from Tom Yong-gung, no, there was some other stuff that you didn't see yet. This is, again, use of stance. He's constantly on guard, in the guy's face in this particular stance position. And look at that spinning back kick and then back to his original stance. And that's really hard to do because the tendency is after you've delivered a technique to be slightly off balance or... the more to me, it's one thing to be able to do a high kick or a flip or some movement, but it's coming back into stance that actually defines you as somebody who's mastered that particular skill. So here again, this is something that always happens in movies. The good guy gets kind of is good-hearted, but this is not appreciated by his opponent. These are the real tattoos of David Ismalone, and I actually would say we get to see him fighting now. When we see David fight, this is not a character, Mad Dog. This basically is him. He's like that. He's kind of like a very fun character. We just saw as he steps into the ring now, and everybody's like, running for cover. He's actually quite charming and fun. He's French. He's a French martial artist, and has been training in Thailand and started doing film work. And very fun, very charismatic kind of guy, but really quite a character in his own right. So a lot of what we're seeing here is the real David Ismalone. I don't think he breaks bottles on people's heads that often, but he is a wild and crazy guy. And he's starring in like the Hong Kong version of Jackass, the American show Jackass, which is called Ayar, for which he does all kind of weird and wonderful stunts, not too dissimilar to the kind of things he's doing here. But what's really cool is the way that everybody has a specific attribute, a particular style for Tony Jaa to kind of contend with. The first guy in this sequence, which was Big Bear, which is sheer brute strength. Then you had Yoshiro with his kind of like very light, fast fighting techniques. See the pictures on the wall behind of all these former Muay Thai champions. And then you have David Ismalone's character here. You have Mad Dog, who does have some basic martial arts technique, but his main thing is he's just using everything at hand in order to make life difficult for Tony Jaa. So it's like everybody has is not a repetitive sense of like we've seen the same fight 3 times. Each sequence is very, very different dynamic to it, and each opponent has his own particular strengths. And David, I think, really comes across very well here because he's kind of like got to... He not only has to sell all this as an actor, but he's actually in the midst of it. It's always dangerous when you're working with props, and these breakaways are nowhere near as safe as they might be in an American movie. So this is kind of like... he throwing everything but the kitchen sink. I guess there's obviously no rules. The only rules of this kind of fight club is there are no rules. So he gets to, do everything at hand. And surprisingly, perhaps, at the end of the day, nobody on the movie was seriously hurt through the whole production. Nobody had any kind of life-threatening injury. Jaa was burnt and had kind of bumps and bruises that you might expect. I think there's a sense, when working in movies in Asia, that people kind of do tend... In America, they tend to rely on technology to save them. And I think here there's a sense that the people actually use their own wits and reflexes to kind of look after themselves. So I think the accident and fatality rate on American movies is actually quite a bit higher than it is on Asian action films. That's one of the reasons why, is that people here kind of go into them there's great precision to the rehearsals and the choreography of the sequences, and then after that, you get people who are doing these kind of films where they're reflexes and their timing is so heightened that it becomes even though it's still, there is an element of danger, it becomes a lot safer than it might otherwise be. It's a fantastic sequence, and what I always find impressive about this team is the fact that they can actually constantly come up with payoffs at the end of a sequence like this. There's the idea that you might otherwise run out of steam, and this is good. It's showing the kind of these two guys squaring off, but they're not going to fight. It's just going to be again a finale of the fight between Ting and Mad Dog. But there's an idea that otherwise, unless they're hands, this sequence would really kind of run out of steam, because where are you going to go? But no, through the glass they go, and he's hitting him on the way down, and bam, that's it. Notice they make sure that Mad Dog hasn't died, because you don't want to set Ting up as the kind of guy that wants to kill people. So they always, even though he's defeated these guys using these really quite brutal fighting techniques, for somebody inspired by Buddhism, he's not actually a killer. He's not actually there to kill people. And this is like, the sequence came out quite effective. And I remember watching the movie the first time and not really being sure what to make of it. But actually this is a gesture of the throwing of these coins is like a gesture of respect, and showing that how much these guys, the audience appreciates the fighting prowess of Tony Jaa's character. So you get them throwing the coins. All these guys, the Westerners you see, are all the kind of guys we used to use in Hong Kong movies: backpackers, travelers, guys living in hostels, tourists. You pull them in off the street. Hey guys, do you want to be in a movie? And it adds an international flavor to the film. But I don't think any of them would have been professional actors or even professional extras. One of the very few CG effects in the film coming up. There's hardly any. I mean, the film prides itself on not using CG in the action, but the coin coming up there was a CG coin. So they used that for practical purposes. I think you'd have been there quite a while trying to get a coin to come up in the camera quite that slow, so you could actually see it in that kind of detail. So I'm always considering that this clubs have this kind of level of violence and drug dealing and all these things going. I'm surprised they're not raided more often, but actually we get a police raid happening at the end of the scene. It always gets a big laugh when the police come and the MC kind of starts the music and they pretend it's just like some kind of dance club. So this sequence here was actually longer. We actually, after they see Don has got away, they actually go to a food stall, and you have a conversation between the principals, leading into a shot coming up, and we see them sitting eating some lunch boxes, like eating food from a lunchbox. This looks like a longer sequence because it's truncated. The bad guy says, "How do you know these country boys?" And Don never gets to answer. But there's actually an earlier scene when they're talking at a food stall, and he shows the money to them. He shows them the money that he's got, and it's like just really leading into this, seeing them buying food and talking about what the next step is going to be in the plan to get back Ong-Bak. But that was deleted, unbelievably, on the deleted scenes elsewhere in the movie. So I should mention also that that in the Luc Besson edit of the film, the only time we see Moylek's sister is in the scene when she overdoses on cocaine. So it's kind of strange that later in the movie, George mentions to her that people die in reference to the sister, but we actually, in the Luc Besson version, don't get to see the sister that much. We don't get to see her die. So, I mean, some people prefer different versions of the film. I mean, obviously, for the French market and the American market, the Luc Besson edit worked, but I think for our market this film is much better in its entirety, and the only element that should have been changed and was the score, because the original score perhaps would not work as well for non-Asian audiences. But as I mentioned, Luc Besson put together his own motion picture soundtrack, and none of the songs, are actually in the movie. It's like songs inspired by the film. It's all hip-hop French songs. The last one is I'm Eric Beguin and Eric Melville, Final Fight, and that song is used in the US version of the film and on the first half of the first US trailer for Ong-Bak. But they actually, the music used in the French version really didn't have much relevance to the film itself, but I think it just gave it a kind of hip-hop edge, which you kind of needed to launch it into the French marketplace. And it worked because the film was a major hit in France. And Luc Besson, an early champion of Pracha Pinkyo and Tony Jaa, and so to be respected for that, even though I think probably I would take issue with some of the choices he made in terms of editing the film. So this sequence, a truncated version of this scene, does appear in the Luc Besson version of the movie, but this is the one time that we actually get to see the sister of Lek in the film, and so it's kind of, that whole subplot is kind of cut out, and I don't know why that is. The other thing that's cut out from the Luc Besson print is actually the backstory, the idea of Ting being discovered as a baby at the foot of Ong-Bak. And again, maybe there was a feeling on the part of the guys working on Luc Besson's team that this was very Asian, this concept of this, the babe, the kind of the orphan child who grows up to become a hero, in some sense was Asian. I feel it's a very universal story and a very universal idea, but they obviously felt it didn't work, and so that any reference to that was cut from their Luc Besson international version of the film. The actress Ngak here, played by Rungrawe Barinjingdekol, and you actually get to see a lot of production stills of her looking very sexy and svelte, and she doesn't really come across that way in the movie. It's played very realistic, her life, the tragedy of her life as a hooker and as a victim of this horrible guy. I mean, a great actor playing Don. You really believe that he's evil. I mean, you know, sometimes you really need somebody. Well, you need a good actor to convey somebody as horrible and as vicious as he is. Wanakit Siriaput, and he really, you don't doubt for a minute this really is the person that you're seeing. So this is the one sequence you see with her, but we don't really know what her relationship to Lek is in the movie and in the international version. But here we're seeing the full thing, and it's like, again, gives another level of depth to Muay Lek's character in the movie. The fact that she was, even though she's the younger sister, she was kind of taking care of Ngek and has failed. So it's kind of like, and then the only family she has left is George Humlai, who then dies at the end of the film. So it kind of adds to her position it adds to kind of the emotional impact of her scenes in the film. This I always found hard to fathom, is the fact that, you know, after taking out the guys that we saw him take out, that Tony Jaa, that Ting is not actually able to take out Don more quickly and effectively, that Don is actually able to get away at this point, was a bit of a reach. But I guess it was just, you needed it. You needed the distraction of the girl overdosing. Look at the Spy Game poster there, by the way. Another nod to international filmmaking. Now, there's another truncated scene here. When everybody's leaving the building, they kind of, they manage to navigate their way around a security guard as they leave the building. You see everybody using their different method. Ting is acrobatic and he jumps and flips to get out of the way of the security guard, and George does this kind of funny kick and then he leaves, and so that was cut. I think maybe there's a feeling that you didn't need that before you got to the chase using these tuk-tuks, these three-wheel tricycles, which are like a mini taxi service in Bangkok. Anybody who's been to Thailand will know the tuk-tuk is such a key method of transport in the capital, which is permanently gridlocked, so you kind of need these fast vehicles like tuk-tuks and motorbikes to get from A to B. But the guys responsible for this are the Sang stunt team, who are famed for doing these wonderful tuk-tuk chase sequences, which have been seen in other films. They worked on two of the Bond movies shot in Thailand, The Man with the Golden Gun and Tomorrow Never Dies, and also a TV advert which used Pierce Brosnan from the Bond movies, Ang Zhang Ziyi from Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, also shot in Thailand, which had like a tuk-tuk chase sequence. But they're really great at using this particular vehicle and its unique dynamics to make for an exciting chase sequence. And there's a sense that the director has said, you know, you can go in and you can do a car chase anywhere in the world, and you can do a motorcycle chase anywhere in the world, but only in Bangkok could you do a tuk-tuk chase. So, you know, using these vehicles. And the reason they call tuk-tuks is kind of onomatopoeic, because that's the noise they make as they drive along, tuk-tuk, tuk-tuk. So they're called tuk-tuks for that reason. And I really think it's like this was a really... again, an example to raise the action a notch, and you've just seen all this amazing slam bang martial arts fighting. It's like, okay, we can do car chases as well, and not only that, we can do a uniquely Thai car chase sequence in that we're going to show you these tuk-tuks in action. And this is, again, even though you do have stunt drivers employed, for the sequences where you see Tony Jaa interacting with the tuk-tuks, it's always him. So that was the big selling point in really pushing Ong-Bak in the Western market, is no CG, no wires, no stunt doubles, that it was like what you're seeing was real. And it really, you know, exactly comes across that way. And Tony Jaa literally risking life and limb for the. And again, there's a bit of a reach. Don staying one jump ahead. I'm kind of like, they should have got him by now. But I guess it serves the purposes of the plot that you get this particular sequence, that you get this elongated, stunt-packed tuk-tuk chase sequence. And I got to say, I mean, after this, I would think you'd have a hard time doing a chase sequence in Bangkok with the tuk-tuk, because they must have used every particular maneuver. Nice moment there between these two guys who've had this kind of previously antagonistic relationship, and now they're like kind of two hometown boys teamed up against these bad guys. There's rain on the floor there. You always get, obviously this is shot in rainy season, so you get some sequences where rain's on the ground, and some like this where there's obviously no rain on the ground. It's a sunny sky. You always get that when you're editing films together. But I think you'd have a hard time finding a tuk-tuk stunt sequence, a tuk-tuk stunt that's not already in this sequence. So in the small but brilliant history of tuk-tuk chase sequences, this one actually shines above all. There's a little nod, I think, to Lethal Weapon 3. Was it 2 or 3? And they had a motorcycle come right to the end of a freeway that's under construction. So you got this, use of these vehicles here plummeting down. And these are real tuk-tuks dropped from a real height. There's a few incidental moments of CG effect in the film as a whole, but very, very few. So really, normally what you see is what you get. And I remember talking to the stunt team about wires, and was Tony Jaa ever on a wire? They said no, but the people he fight sometimes had to be on wires to be able to match his physicality. So the stuff that he was doing genuinely from the ground, you couldn't ask another stunt guy to do, so they would have to be on a wire to deliver the same level of action that he was delivering. So the George obviously got some experience of driving a tuk-tuk, and you've got to wonder where they actually learned to drive tuk-tuks, because they didn't have them back in the village, and doesn't really have the sense that George has been working as a tuk-tuk driver in Bangkok. Maybe he was, but anyway. So this is very reflective of Bangkok as it is today. I mean, Thailand, one of the great lions of the Asian economic boom, and there's a lot of construction work and a lot of industry happening in the country. It's a very exciting place at the moment, and I think the film industry is kind of reflective of the increasingly prominent place that Thailand is playing in the Asian panorama of countries. So coming up now, we get kind of the big payoff stunt. I think you always, in this film all the way through, and I'm really impressed by it, the fact that they, despite everything, the brilliance, everything that's gone before, you get one big payoff, boom, in the side of a building. And actually, as they go down, if you freeze frame and go back, when it crashes into the building, there's a wall on the lower left of the screen under the highway. You can see writing that says, "Hi, Luc Besson, we're waiting for you." This is the same guard being lectured here who you saw Ting and George get past in the edited sequence. And Don is telling him, be more careful in future. But anyway, obviously the message to Luc Besson was received and understood, because Luc Besson did indeed acquire the film for France, re-edited the movie for the international version, and big supporter of the movie. So she mentioned that a sequence just then where you go back, and if you watch here, when they go into the river, you actually get to see the Chao Phraya River again. You also get the Rama 9th Bridge in the background, and the same bank building, very distinctive kind of pointed building on the right of the frame there is the Kasikorn Bank Thai building, which you actually saw earlier when Tony Jaa was going to the temple to pray. So you see it again in this sequence. And this is kind of like, I always remember this of the much maligned water world, but there was a sequence there when Kevin Costner went underwater and showed the remains of this civilization that still survived underwater. And I was reminded slightly of this here. I'm wondering actually at the logistics of it, whether you would actually be able to store these kind of ancient artifacts underwater or not. This obviously shot in a tank so that you could actually put all of these statues in nets, but visually it's really stunning to see all these Buddha statues. Statues themselves, when you get up close, are not really that great as far as model work goes. I mean, they're really actual figures of that size, but they don't look particularly realistic to me. But this is a great sequence shot in a tank where you see Tony Jaa among all these kind of suspended, and these are all the treasures that have been stolen by the criminal syndicate. And Ong-Bak, he's obviously looking for Ong-Bak. Ong-Bak is not among them, but this is their method of hiding them in plain sight. They're just below the surface of the river, and from here they'll be shipped overseas. And even now, I live on Hollywood Road in Hong Kong, and you see in the windows of the antique stores in Hollywood Roads pieces of stone carvings, and it's stuff from temples in Vietnam and Thailand and elsewhere, but it's just been stolen, sold to collectors, and will end up in somebody's home or some museum elsewhere in the Western world. So here's news report and all the stolen treasures being brought up by the police. So this is one of the very few times in the movie we get to see the police. For all the criminal activity that goes on, we hardly ever see any policemen in the whole of the film. But I guess that's a given of this kind of brand of cinema. This shot here of the smoke coming out of the hole is CG enhanced, reminiscent slightly of a scene in Itchy the Killer when the guy breathes out and all the smoke comes out through the cuts in his cheeks. There's actually another deleted scene here set in the same building where an expert comes in to appraise the head of Ong-Bak, and then we dissolve from there to the old folks suffering in the village, and the old lady's got a fever, and it's showing really how badly off the village is of Nong Pradu is with the absence of the head of Ong-Bak. And maybe they felt they'd already established that, but you had the expert, obviously the resident antique expert, coming in to appraise how much the head of Ong-Bak is actually worth. So this sequence completely cut from the Luc Besson print because we didn't have, in that version of the movie, the relationship, the fact these two are sisters is not established. One reason, if I have one criticism of the movie, is I think they really dropped the actress playing Muay Thai in at the deep end, because she really had to, given somebody who's not got vast experience as an actress, Pumori Yodkamal, I think she handles the kind of the quirky street urchin stuff very well, but I think that the weeping and wailing, it tends to get a bit grating, because she really did have to come in and not as she was a student at the time she did the film, not an experienced actress at all, and delivers herself much better, I think, in the comedy, and the tragic stuff is quite hard to do. She was born 9th of February 1982 in Bangkok, and nickname is Air. She's the eldest of 4 girls, collects popcorn buckets, and drives a Vios black car. Her favourite food is noodles, has a dog named Jelly and a cat named Tam, and has become a really popular youth idol in Thailand after this movie. So this scene was in the Luc Besson version, and it's kind of strange when George says people die, obviously referring to the sisters' overdose. And so that was kept in there, but it's kind of a non sequitur because we didn't actually get to see the sister, or we got to see a girl overdose. We didn't get to see the relationship between the two women. So here's setting up this our raging bull sequence. This movie, I think, when you look at it, the smart thing about this as a martial arts action movie, it never repeats itself. So you had the fights in the illegal fight club, and you've had your tuk-tuk chase, and obviously Muay Thai, as most people today know it, it takes place in a ring. So you want to have at least one ring fight in the film so that you can actually see Muay Thai being used as a combative, sportive martial art, which is what we're about to see in the scene that's being set up now. But this was something that I think was greatly to the credit of the filmmakers, in that they not only decided to kind of show off all these techniques that had never really been seen before in action cinema, but beyond that, they wanted to do it in a way that set it in different arenas throughout the movie, so that the whole thing is not repeated. This is kind of another thing which is a classic plot point of fighting movies, going back to the old black and white film noir, the Warner Brothers movies, is the idea of the fighter who has to throw a fight to, because the gangsters are pushing him to do it's kind of the raging bull thing. This is a really cool shot. This probably, in terms of just sheer cinematography, is my favourite shot in the movie. Look at the white guy bodyguard there. Don Ferguson is his name. He runs taekwondo school in Bangkok. Super nice guy, and he turns up later in the film. He actually shot a lot of rehearsal footage with Tony Jaa for this movie, and I believe that's elsewhere on the DVD as well. But Don, one of the nicest guys in the business, and he just gets established. His character, again, every character is established before they show up actually as he doesn't just come out of left field as one white guy among the Thai. guys. We see him here as the bodyguard, and at the end of the movie, he's working in the cave with the other henchmen. So we've established him. You see his shoulder there at the top of the frame, that the bad guy actually has a white bodyguard. So this is Muay Thai as most of us have seen it over the years. As I mentioned before, I was living in Thailand at the same camp as the camp run by Master Yot Tong, who we saw earlier in the film. And there were two major stadiums in Bangkok. One is Lumpini and one is Rajdaman. And we don't actually go into either of those in this film. This is like depicted as being a kind of a street level gambling arena where guys are actually fighting for money. It's kind of a few steps up, I guess, from the fight club that we saw earlier in the film. And again, establishing Surin as a guy who's going to use drugs. In the original score, all these instruments are heard playing traditional Thai music. And it's the same kind of music that you hear when they perform the Ram Muay, which is the traditional dance you see at the beginning of a Thai boxing fight, which is something else that we don't really get to see in this film. And that is a very acquired taste. It is something that really reflects Thai culture. But anyway, the replacement score on here, maybe that was a little bit, it looks a little unusual because you actually see the instruments playing and we don't get to hear any music. But to me, it still works well, and you need a consistency of score. I think it would have been the worst choice in the world to go back and forward between what is really quite a European-sounding score and too much classical Thai. Then you'd have really would have been like odd juxtaposition. Now, to talk about our bad guy here, Saming, amazingly, Chatapong Pantanangkul, who plays Saming here, was not actually a martial artist per se. He's a rugby player, a very strong physical presence. And if you look at his screen test, which certainly was on the Thai DVD, and I imagine it's going to be on this one as well, he just came in and impressed the producers with his acting presence and his physicality. And what's smart about the way they've used him is they don't try to say, okay, here's a guy as physical as Tony Jaa. What they do is they just come in and use his drug-induced toughness, that the only reason that he can actually stand up at all to Ting is the fact that he's on these kind of steroid kind of drugs. He's Burmese, and that's kind of interesting. That means a lot more to Thai people than it does to overseas audiences, because there's a long time rivalry between the Thais and the Burmese. If you go back to see another movie released on our label, which is called Bangladesh, you'll see that that kind of the Alamo of the Burmese Thai fighting. But throughout history there have been these battles, and a lot of the martial art techniques that you see devised in Muay Thai and Krabi Krabong and all the other arts that you see coming out of Thailand were devised for battle against the Burmese. And there was for many years these two neighboring nations were fighting. So this battle between a heroic Thai and a villainous Burmese again has kind of different resonance for Thai audiences than it does to us. I mean, I think there's a tendency to kind of look at Asian audiences as being all cut from one cloth. But actually, once you've lived in Asia for a while, you find that there is great national identity is very important to people. And there's certainly no sense of like, any globalization has not come to Asia. Everybody has their own unique identity and their own kind of traits that make things so that makes the diversity of the region that diversity is what makes living in the region so rewarding. That you have Japanese, Korean, Thai, Chinese, Burmese culture side by side. So here's the ultimate sacrifice being paid for the retrieval of Ong-Bak, that this warrior has thrown the fight, and kind of like a very downbeat moment there. Here we are outside of Bangkok at this service station. It's actually been kind of built up specifically to be trashed later. It's actually not a real service station. It was actually partly a set constructed there in the countryside so that you could actually have people smashing, bashing, crashing, and set fire to it without too many problems. Now, this film actually, given the complexity of the action sequences, shot for a relatively limited budget. And this is actually one of the shots, one of the scenes when the budget, you can actually tell, because this particular set doesn't really have the texture that you would expect from a bigger budgeted film. But there's very few moments in the movie when you're actually aware of the fact that the film itself was shot for not a huge amount of money. because no one had any idea that it would launch the comeback of Thai action cinema. Everybody was like thinking, well, who are these crazy guys off doing? We don't do martial art movies in Thailand. Well, who are these guys wasting their time? At the time, there was all wacky comedies and romances and gangster films, and the idea was this was the problem that Tony Jaa had when he was signed to Grammy. All the other Grammy artists were all these pretty boy singer turned actors, the kind that we have in Hong Kong at the moment. And here's this guy who's kind of got this country boy look about him, is rough and ready, and he doesn't fit that type of some kind of pretty boy singing, dancing kind of guy. They just didn't know what to do with him. So he kind of had to, come the hour, come the man. He had to create his own opportunity, working with the team, putting together Ong-Bak to give himself a kind of a showcase within which to show off all the extraordinary abilities that he's got. This again, the old bad guy mistake 101. You had the hero at your mercy. You had a gun to his head. Why didn't you shoot him then and there and you'd be away and clear? I mean, I'm not recommending it because, of course, we all, by this time in the movie, we love the character of Ting and we love the other two as well, but I mean, it's like, bad guys never do that, do they? There's another sequence. There's actually, this little sequence we're seeing here, the interior fight actually looked a little better on the if you can call it pre-visualizations. There was actually a sequence where you actually saw this mapped out by the stunt team in a warehouse where they were using all the props. And it looked slightly better when they were doing it there than it came off here. I mean, the thing about doing the pre-visualization stuff when you're shooting on with a handycam is you get all the time in the world. When you're shooting 35mm on location, a lot of the times you don't have all the time in the world. So sometimes you can actually, because you've got 30 takes to do something on DV, you can actually make it. In some cases, sometimes it can look slightly better that way than it would do if you're doing it on film. So again, yet another environment. Now this gag we're about to see here, who came up with it first? Me. I actually pitched it to a guy called Richard Norton, I'm sure you're familiar with, an Australian martial arts actor, for a movie called Under the Gun, Iron Fist. Or rather, I told him about my idea for a guy, a martial arts guy, setting his feet on fire and using them as a burning weapon so he would kick. It was slightly different to this, but it was the same basic idea. And I told Richard. Richard obviously liked the idea because he went back to Australia and used that in his movie, which I don't mind at all because Richard's a family friend. He's my stepfather's student in karate, and I don't mind at all. It used there. I don't know where don't know whether there was any connection if Tony Jaa actually saw Iron Fist, aka Under the Gun, or probably it's just two people reinventing the wheel, and he came out and did this, and it was pretty badly burnt actually doing this particular thing. Again, all the way through, the thing that I really noticed about the sequence is the balance. Look, see, he does this incredible move and then up into this stance, boom. That is what really adds an edge to his technique that a lot of the other stunt guys and athletic martial arts guys don't do. Good stuntman there. If you freeze frame, the hair of the stuntman is very different length to George's hair. In fact, I think George's hair changes length in the movie. But you notice then the way that the gas pump bounces there, you can see it's actually a prop. Now, when you see when you see Tony coming off the car here, you can actually see his knee pads quite evidently. It's one of the few errors, and one of the things you can actually see from freeze frame. Actually, without a freeze frame, you can see it quite clearly. But obviously, for various reasons, it was felt that they needed to have extra padding for him as he flew down for that particular technique. So one thing that's been, when the people realized this movie was going to be the cult it was, the one choice that was made was to really limit the number of prints being distributed with English subtitles. So the Hong Kong VCD came out with the Thai and Cantonese soundtrack, and it did have English and Chinese subtitles, but the DVD did not. And the reason they did that is because they knew, and neither did the Thai DVD, because they realized as soon as the world being built as it is at the moment, people buying stuff on the internet, as soon as you brought out a subtitled version, it would be bought by the fans around the world. So for that reason, I of course bought it anyway because you didn't need the subtitles. The film, the action scenes themselves would work. But that was the rationale. So this is probably, these versions coming out now. Our version, I hope, will be the best. but having these versions coming out on DVD in America, France, and England are the first time you're going to see the film with English subtitles on it, so that you can actually. I actually had seen the film a bunch of times on the Thai DVD without English subtitles, and I don't speak any Thai, so I still followed the basic plot. But there were some details of it that I only picked up sometime afterwards when I saw the film in the theatres here in Hong Kong, and was of course blown away by it, the impact the movie had on the big screen, even though I'd seen it a bunch of times on DVD. So it really, really worked. This is meant to be in the Ekeng mountain range, and this actual. It actually is a mountain range outside of Bangkok when you see these exteriors leading into the cave. Once you get into the cave itself, it's actually was a set constructed outside Bangkok, and it was really on the side of the road. And you had all these kind of big wooden flats, and within them you had the big setting with the big Buddha head and all the other things that we're going to see shortly. And this, fast, furious, again, another environment, one take. He takes out all these guys with these techniques, and he never said it'd be so easy to have this as kind of a throwaway, but they want to make something special out of it, so they did it all in one take. And then here he goes into the cave, and then as soon as he goes inside, we're into the location. So we're into the set, what amounts to a studio. It was a specially constructed ad hoc studio set, and again, nice, funny shadowing moment. Whatever Tony Jaa does, you get Mum doing the same thing as kind of but in a comedic way, the way he's going in there, and off and running. We've seen empty hands. We've seen a fight in the ring. We've seen a fight. With fire. Now we're going to see weapons. And this is interesting. Despite the effectiveness and brutality of Muay Thai as a fighting style, Thai people love the old Shaw Brothers movies. So this is really, with all these weapons, even though these are Thai, basically adaptations of the Thai weapon techniques. It's really going back to the old Chinese martial arts. There's some very Chinese-influenced poses that you see. Now, one of the guys coming up, I'll point him out, is wearing like a white T-shirt, and a dark shirt is Diu Chupong, or Dan Chupong, who'd be the star of Born to Fight. And I'll point him out when he comes in, because Born to Fight was like the second really major action film from the same team. It has some amazing... The story doesn't... This is the guy here. The film itself doesn't hold up quite as well as Ong-Bak, but that's him. That was him with the white T-shirt, and he's now coming in the back there. He's the star of Born to Fight, Dan Chupong. Diu Chupong, and so he was actually one of the stunt team and got given his own chance to shine in his own movie. But Born to Fight, maybe story-wise not as strong, but action-wise. By the way, the two sticks that we're about to see, we have Tony Jaa using all these different weapons. There's actually very strong background of weapons arts in Thailand. In fact, they had the weapons arts before they had Thai boxing, and it's like an adaptation of Krabi Krabong. Now, this weapon here is the Mai Son Sok, which is the tonfa, what we call the Okinawan would be the tonfa. These kind of, or what in Chinese they call them the crutches, short crutches, the guai. But here they're actually the Mai Son Sok, which is the Thai version of this weapon. As you see, it's quite a bit bulkier. And we really see the jumping skill. And this is one thing that I remember from the initial show reel, was seeing the height that Tony Jaa could jump, and he was actually doing a kind of let's say a pre-visualization some years earlier of this sequence, and just showing the height he could jump without a wire, and everybody's jaw was on the ground because it was such an amazing, his amazing physicality. So here we are. This is the roadside studio set in outside of Bangkok, and the setting for our finale, and the giant head of the Buddha. And really, again, we've seen so much in the movie so far. There maybe was a sense when people first saw the movie, how would they top themselves for the finale? But it's like, hey, you ain't seen nothing yet. Now, of all the edits made by Luc Besson to the film, the ones that I understand the least are the fact that he slightly cut the end fight. In fact, he only cut 3.5 minutes in total, but it was just, the subplot with the sister, I can kind of comprehend why that might not work. But he also took out some of the backstory of the backstory of Ting, and the fact that he'd been given these kind of magic herbs from which had been handed down to his master from the master before. But cutting some of the action, you got to wonder why that was felt to be necessary. But this is just incredible. This is not just Tony Jaa, but please, bear in mind also the Tony Jaa stunt team, because without these guys, wonderful though Tony is, he wouldn't have the same degree of ability, wouldn't have anywhere near the ability to show off his moves as he does now, because you need guys like this to really make it, to sell the technique. So all of these guys have been training for years prior to this, and they were just like, greyhounds at the off. They just couldn't wait. It was like, here's a movie, we're doing a real film, and now we finally get to show what we can do. And I just, how anybody who's a blue-blooded fan of martial arts action cinema could not utterly embrace Tony Jaa after this sequence. It really, I've got no idea, because he's like pulling off moves without wires, without doubles, that we've seen in like a kind of a suggestion of in recent years, but we haven't seen anything as full-blooded as this. And even people who are not particular fans of the genre, there's Don Ferguson again, the man on the end of the wire. He runs the Asia Pacific Taekwondo School in Bangkok. He's the guy pulling the rope. He's worked on a number of films. He was in Final Combat with as a fighter, the Tony White movie, beautiful boxer. Ong-Bak in Twins Effect, and he actually is funny because he and I are in the same sequence, but his scenes were shot in Thailand and mine was shot on the pickup set in Hong Kong, so we never actually met at that time. We actually met before that on Medallion, but we didn't meet during the Twins Effect shoot. And he also worked on Belly of the Beast, Ultraviolet, and he's been working recently on Tom Yum Goong, but that was just a quick moment. I want to mention him because he came and went there. So again, raising the stakes. We have a one-eyed guy with a flying whip check, with this kind of like with this vicious kind of saw, again trying to find a way to raise the stakes for this final battle, and it absolutely delivers on that. And I just think the opening chase sequence through the streets was absolutely amazing. And then by the end of the movie, they haven't run out of steam. They still have this kind of slam bang effect. And this idea, which is kind of very Buddhist in a way, that you have to suffer before you can be redeemed. I mean, it's a Christian idea in a sense. It's a Buddhist idea, paying off whatever karmic debt you've accumulated. So we see both these characters abused. This scene's cut from a lot of the versions of the movie, and it was actually, there were two versions released in Hong Kong. And the theatrical release was just about the same as the version you're seeing now, the Thai version, except the bone break, both the George's arm being broken and then in retaliation Ting breaking the leg of the villain. These were cut so that they get like a category 2B rating. You can actually get a category 3 rating in Hong Kong for violence, but it severely limits the audience. I mean, Sin City, that's playing right now as I speak, is a category 3, but not for sexuality, for violence. And the same cut is also on the VCD. However, the long version with the arm and leg breaking shots are on the Hong Kong DVD, which did receive a Category 3 rating. And I guess it was felt that if the DVD only went out to people of 18 and over, then it wouldn't be a big problem. Again, this is something that we've established at the beginning, that this is the sacred root, and that it gives it enhances the power and strength of the user, and it's really what gives him the ability to contend with his drug-powered rival. Something that doesn't have the same resonance in the Luc Besson edit, because that whole thing was cut out, so we have no idea what the actual merit of this root is that he's chewing. But basically, by spitting the juice from this root onto his arms, he's kind of like empowering himself. Reminded slightly of Van Damme's movie Kickboxer. I mean, maybe Van Damme's fallen slightly by the wayside in terms of the cutting edge of action. But I remember when Kickboxer came out, it was one of the first movies set in Thailand where they actually went in and showed all these kind of traditions of Thai fighting, and they had a Thai master teaching him ancient form of Muay Thai. So, full credit to Van Damme. I mean, he was one of the first guys to go to Thailand and bring out this kind of action. And now we have it taken to the nth degree by Thai action cinema proper. Now, the sequence they're fighting on we see these guys going at it, and it's, again, how to differentiate from the fight in the ring. So you've got this very acrobatic combat between the two of them, which is very different to the style of fighting that you saw when they were fighting, relatively constrained by the rules of the ring when you had their kind of Thai boxing match. And occasionally, you got a double for Surin, because the actor himself is not a martial arts guy per se. So he's very strong and very physical, and taking a lot of punishment in the movie, but didn't have particularly sophisticated technique. So you have members of the Tony Jaa stunt team actually performing their techniques. It's funny, you had Tony Jaa do this movie. I think the same year Final Combat was made by Tony White. So you had two Tony and Tony, and I would argue, it was the best and worst action films to come out of Thailand in the same year. The best being Ong-Bak and the worst being Final Combat. So it hasn't been released anywhere to this day, Final Combat. So obviously a movie that didn't really work. But I'd like to see it anyway, because so many of my friends worked on it. Look at that incredible timing and precision there. Just phenomenal. Again, jumping in from out of frame with the knee, which is a trademark. You're going to see that again in Tom Yum Goong. I saw some of the action from Tom Yum Goong the other day, and it looked absolutely incredible. And this again, the idea, this is a kind of reminds me a bit of Jackie Chan walking forward at the end of Drunken Master 2, when he's kind of like getting kicked by, in that movie was Ken Lo Wei Gong. This is a double here for the main villain, because the guy's not a martial artist as such. But that kind of walking forward, this kind of indomitability. And again, this ties into the fact that he's enhanced by the herb, if I can say that. You know, he's had some herb, so he's enhanced. I know how that feels. And this is reminiscent of a scene from an old Golden Harvest movie called Seventh Curse, when Chin Siu Ho and Dick Wei are fighting all these monks on the side of a giant Buddha, and they're fighting. So when you actually see the fight on the Buddha, I felt that was reminiscent of Seventh Curse. I mean, I don't see any, I think that these filmmakers, the makers of Ong-Bak, are very honest and open about the fact that they see themselves as being in a tradition of Asian action filmmaking, and they're very much inspired by Hong Kong cinema. But to me, they're really going one better from what we've seen from Hong Kong action cinema in the last couple of years, and really kind of like beating us at our own game, unfortunately. Similar shot to that is in Tom Yum Goong, but it's actually on Sydney Harbour Bridge at a greater height. So they kind of that's a trademark move, him jumping off and catching somebody else in mid-flight. So our drugged up bad guy coming in now is basically frothing at the mouth. And that's really smart, how you actually come up with a guy who is going to present a viable opponent for Tony Jaa at this stage of the film, when you've seen him beat everybody who's put in his path. How do you find somebody? You really got to say, okay, we're going to crank this guy up on drugs so that he feels no pain, and that will make him a genuinely viable foe. So here, this is at a certain point in combat, it goes beyond the physical to the mental and spiritual. And I think this is another message that, as we brought in, it's a very Thai message. It's a very Asian message. The idea that at a certain point, combat is about spirit, not just about physical technique. And so he's drawing power from the spirit of the Buddha. But having said that, I mean, it's a pretty violent expression of power. And I would say at odds with what Buddhist philosophy is about. But as I say, it's only a movie, and it works fabulously well as an entertainment, and it's good defeating evil, which I think is probably as good a message as the world needs. This is a great shot, another one of the few CG shots you see in the film, and really kind of tailor-made for the trailer. Kids, again, for the third time, I tell you, do not try this and in the playground. You will eliminate your classmates. And finally, somebody has a gun. I mean, there were some guns earlier at the gas station, but you really had I always wonder with these films, it is tricky because in Thailand now there's a tradition of hitmen having guns and riding up on motorbikes and shooting whoever they want to kill. So, you would think, even no matter how good you are at martial arts, if you've got guys with guns, you would be at a disadvantage if you were, if you're just a martial arts guy. So finally the bad guy has a gun, and we think Tony Jaa's kind of out of action. And it's like, boom. And somebody said this finishing move, they thought it was hokey. I think it's so cool. The way he goes down, bam, double knees. I mean, we've been making Hong Kong martial art movies for 40 years. We never saw that. 50 years, however long it's been. I thought it was just such a cool thing. Now, this, of course, is where it really comes down to what a great actor this guy is, the villain of the piece. I mean, he's really, again, they've got this whole thing with the voice, but he's still acting like crazy. And there's George sacrificing himself. Now, there are actually two endings. I'm presuming if you watch the movie, if you're watching the movie with my commentary, you must have seen the film in its entirety already. So you know that in this version, George dies. There actually is an alternate ending in which he survives. And I think there's a sense that he kind of, in order to be purified, had to suffer. So he suffered physically. And in the end, there's a sense of, did he suffer enough? Well, I would say he did. I actually like the ending where he doesn't die, because I don't think we need all the weeping and wailing at the end. But it was, they shot the two endings, and Pracha decided that he liked the ending when George dies to kind of purify himself and to... his father's always waited for him to go back to the village to become a monk, and his last line is, he says, tell my father I'm sorry, I can't become a monk. That doesn't mean he's going to give up the world to permanently become a monk, but there's like a tradition in Thai families that when they reach a certain age, I guess it's kind of the religious equivalent to military service, that young Thai men do go into the temple and become monks for a period of time, and the family are very proud about them doing that. And it was kind of a subplot that George, or Hum Lai's father, always wanted him to do that, and he never had done so. So this is what it comes down to, the head of Ong-Bak, which is, the source of the prosperity of the village. So this is like, one version. Then you got another version. The way he survived is you see later at the village, there he is with his arm bandaged and he's been reunited with his parents. So that alternate ending will be elsewhere on the DVD, so you can take a look. And you pay your money, you take your choice. I actually, that's the one thing I would change, is I would have George survive. Because I kind of like the character. By this point, we kind of like the character. And he's made up for whatever he did wrong, he's made up for by this point. So I couldn't quite understand Pratchett's insistence that he would have to die for his sins. But anyway, that's what they wanted. And again, Muay Thai, really having to go in the deep end as an inexperienced actress. I mean, she was in school during the shoot. She was in school when they hired her to be in the movie, and she went back to school. She was in school during the shoot and went back to the school afterwards. And she's a school kid, a very young girl, and didn't have any acting experience. So they really dropped her in at the deep end, and she had to kind of deliver this grief-stricken performance. And again, the scene with her sister and the scene with, it's kind of repetitive, and we see her here now with George. So there was kind of a downer ending, and I didn't know necessarily acting-wise this was her best moment, that you could have actually had a different ending. But that was the choice made, and that's what we're presenting to you here. So this is, again, and also I mentioned the score here, I think is very evocative. So a price to be paid for the saving of Ong-Bak. But still, we can now have we pull back from this. Listen to that beautiful flute. Tony Hannigan, first flute on the mission in Titanic. Let's hear it for Tony Hannigan. Very evocative. I love the flute. One of my friends in the industry is David Carradine, who plays the flute in the old Kung Fu TV series and in Kill Bill. And I think it's enormously evocative as an instrument. All woodwind is very evocative. So it works very well in this context. And it's like Asian without being too identifiably Asian, just the sound of the instrument. So here we are with Ong-Bak restored to his glory. And of course the scar on the face explained by the fact that the statue had survived a war between Thailand and Burma. As I mentioned earlier, that's such a key part of the race memories of the Thai people. Their fights with the Burmese, which was the background of both Suryotai and Bang Rajan, two of the great historical. Now, the guy in the white dancing here, if you watch carefully, between the wide shot and the close-up, there's a kind of everybody moves, but the guy on the right there with the bull on his T-shirt, that is Panna. That's Panna Rittikrai, who is the action director for the film and, one of the great masters, the maestros of Thai action cinema. And he only appears in the film twice. One time driving the van and when Tony slides underneath it, and then now. And there's Tony Jaa as a monk riding an elephant. Leads us very neatly into Tom Yum Goong, his new film, in which he plays a young man who's taking care of elephants. So there's kind of a nice segue from one to the other. But anyway, that was Panna himself had starred in the original version of Born to Fight, which they remade after this. But he by this point, I think, was more interested in working behind the camera as an action director, so he only has that very small walk-on. So here we have our score playing during the end credits. In the international version, the music is Je Reste Ghetto. I Rest in the Ghetto, by a group called Tragedy, a French hip-hop group. But we have our own score playing at the end of the movie. Well, what a great pleasure to sit and watch this movie with you guys. I mean, I was such a fan of Ong-Bak when I first saw it on DVD, and have been happy and delighted by its international success. I mean, how great for us fans of martial art movies to find a new legend in this century, in this decade, somebody who's absolutely a worthy successor to Jackie Chan, to Bruce Lee, to Jet Li, but has his own unique identity and is bringing Thai action cinema to a new level. I absolutely love Ong-Bak. I think from what I've seen of Tom Yum Goong, it's like, you ain't seen nothing yet. He's still got plenty of gas in the tank, and it's going to be an amazing ride for him. So a wonderful vehicle for Tony Jaa, a wonderful filmmaking exercise from Prachya Pinkyo and Panna Rittikrai and the rest of the team at Bar Ram Yu. So I hope you enjoyed the film as much as I have. And if it's your first experience in Thai cinema, take a look, because there's some other Thai movies that will be brought out on our label. Bang Rajan is one. And also, you can catch, I'm sure you'll see other Thai movies under other circumstances, but it is really one of the emerging powerhouses of Asian cinema. Thailand, a great location to shoot films, and also an industry in its own right in terms of producing films of all genre. Horror films particularly, the Pang brothers, two Chinese guys who have lived in Thailand for quite some years, doing horror movies over there, horror, romance, all kind of movies, and now martial arts cinema, and it's really on the cutting edge and as good as anybody's doing anywhere in the world at the moment, in my opinion. And I think I'm really happy to see the great tradition that we established in Hong Kong being continued in another Asian country and now spreading out into the rest of the world. So I'd like to thank you for your support, continued support for our releases by Hong Kong Legends and Premiere Asia. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to collaborate with the team at Contender to do these commentaries and other bonus materials to kind of like really highlight the things that I love about Asian action cinema and Asian cinema in general, and to try to communicate them to the broadest possible audience. And it's very rewarding from the emails and other messages that I get, that people really enjoy the work that we do. So thank you for supporting Asians. As somebody who's working in Asian cinema and celebrating Asian cinema, thank you so much. Sawadee Kap, Joy Geen, Sayonara, it's Bay Logan saying goodbye and take care.